Welcome to Meganet Gaming, and today we are going to review another Ultima game. We previously reviewed Ultima Ultima Online, and today we're going to review Ultima IX Ascension. I've actually played a total of 4 of the Ultima games in any depth and detail in order to do a review that's meaningful. It's able to summarize the main points in such a way that's honest. It's brief but covers everything in the game in a meaningful way. It has Ultima IX, Ultima Underworld 1, Ultima Underworld 2, and Ultima Online. Ultima Online is arguably, well, it's my favorite from the Ultima series, and one of my favorite MMORPGs of all time. This game kind of falls on the other end of the spectrum for various reasons. The question is whether or not the game is as bad as some people state it is, or is there a game hidden underneath all the negative publicity from Ultima fans that's actually worth playing. So, let's go over some of the background information on the game, and in the meantime I'll demonstrate some of the basic gameplay that shows the graphics grabbing stuff. There'll be no spoilers. I'll just show some basic information as well as culminate in the end of it. Will show one of the many issues with the game, just trying to get the thing to run properly. So here's the game. As far as the music and the 3D graphics for the time, it's all well done. I would say if the graphical style even holds up quite well to today. It's obviously dated, but it does show environments that look quite good in the context of the Ultima series and world. Now, whether or not they are accurate depictions, I'm not familiar enough with the previous 8 titles, nor some of the lore behind it, whether or not to argue whether the depictions are accurate all around. But anyways, this game is developed by Origin Systems, published by none other than Electronic Arts. It doesn't mean it's necessarily bad though, because it has Richard Garriott's name as a director on it still, so perhaps he is able to release a title under Electronic Arts that's actually really good, which has happened numerous times over the years. It was released on November 23rd of 1999 for Microsoft Windows. It's a single-player role-playing game. It's the 9th and final part of the main series, and arguably some might say it's greater than the 9th, considering 7 was in 2 parts, and there's the part 0 that was a precursor to the official Ultima series. So it's either the 9th, the 11th, or the 12th, depending on how you look at it. I'm going to say 9th since it's number 9, and the 2-parter of 7 I'm going to count as 1. So the Avatar escaped from Pagan in the previous one. He's transported back to Britannia for one final battle with the Guardian. So he wakes up. He's in the U.S. or on Earth somewhere. I'm assuming English-speaking American accent. Earth, but doesn't necessarily have to be the case. Game starts. You walk around the house, grab some items. See an advertisement for Longbow 2 and Ultima Online 2. Walk outside, practice some skills, and then answer a series of questions that will help depend on what type of will help determine what type of character you're going to be. I answered them in I figured I'd answer them on this based on my own morality in real life, and it said I'd be a fighter. I don't know if I'm much of a fighter, but whatever. So, that's where the plot starts. And, like I said, the graphics and the sound are not the issue with this game. Now, on to the controls. After a patch, they did fix the jumping, which was quite atrocious in the original release. But since we're reviewing the GOG release here, that has the jumping fixed in such a way where it's not that big of an issue. It's actually quite well done for a game where jumping isn't a core mechanic. Well, the jumping puzzles, I should elaborate. So, many of the previous Ultima games had a bit of an open world feel to them, if not a purely open world design. There were a lot of tricks involved, but you had shopkeepers that would be up during the day, sleep at night. Some people, NPCs, would act towards you based on some of the choices you've made. And it was, especially getting to from about 4 to 7, I would say, it is possible to get quite immersed in the world without having to overly utilize your imagination in such a way that they're the first couple games required quite a bit of imagination to extrapolate some symbols on the screen, some crude depictions of crude symbols into a real world. In this game you're given 3D graphics though, but the world feels quite false in a lot of ways. The character interactions, they give you some choices in dialogue answers, but they don't really make any sense in the context of this game at all. Unless this were to be a role-playing game about some random car salesman being plucked out of the Midwest in America and tossed into Britannia to fight some final battle. But asking what a paladin is, asking what different aspects of lore is, asking what his journey is, considering he's been a part of 8 previous journeys. It could have been handled in a way that wouldn't have been a completely disrespectful towards the lore. Instead of having it as a dialogue option, just have it explain what it is in a skippable cutscene style thing, or have text that comes up on the screen explaining what these things are, and let it be skippable. Also, the game deviates from the previous games in that it's rather linear, and not only is it linear, it's also linear in such a way where you can skip much of the content just by taking advantage of the numerous bugs in the game's design. If you go on YouTube, you can see somebody that sped around this game in under an hour, and most of it just takes advantage of different bugs, including many of which involve traveling underneath the landscape and getting to a certain point underneath a part of the map, or perhaps over part of the map in a place where you shouldn't be, and then it triggers a certain condition in the game's logic, and then all of a sudden you're he spent 15 minutes abusing some bugs to get an extra 3 or 4 hours into the game. But setting the bugs aside, let's say you wanted to play this game in an honest fashion and go through the content itself. The combat's rather mediocre. This was a point in RPG history where learning spells and casting spells and everything wasn't streamlined quite that well, so it does have some age to it. But it's in the context of a story that doesn't make any sense in the context of either the Ultima series or really in the context of the game itself all that much. Unless, of course, it's just some random guy from Texas while dreaming gets transported into either a real or dreamed construction called Britannia to fight some real or dreamed final battle as this avatar character. And even if you go to the extreme of saying this is a dream world, so logic and such doesn't apply and whatnot, the story still isn't terribly exciting or creative. It's much of the generic video game fantasy type where you'd be more apt to expect this in a 3D action adventure style game more so than a role-playing game. Also, considering that the type of character you are and a lot of your stats are based on some card game to beginning, I mean, it's an interesting mechanic, and I'll give it some points for being creative. But it really takes away the freedom of choice an RPG usually allows in constructing a character as you see fit. I'd be willing to accept this card game as being like the basic, like in a lot of RPGs there'll be the pre-made class thing, or you answer the series of better example would be how you answer the series of questions in Elder Scrolls games to determine your class, but without an underlying mechanic to allow you to actually create your class without doing some file editing of the game's files is really a bit inexcusable for a game, a CRPG of this era. So what you're left with is it lacks the story, the depth, and the semi-open world nature, freedom of choice, and other aspects that are to different degrees to different people necessary for a role-playing experience are all lacking in this game to varying degrees. But that doesn't necessarily make this a bad game. I rated Skyrim fairly high on my list. It didn't go into the must-have, the A- to A+ must-haves category, but it went into the very good category nonetheless. Despite having issues with lore, NPCs that failed to respond appropriately to what was going on in the environment, the linearity of the main plot, and other issues with world building and development in that game. Because I felt if you just approach that game as an action-adventure game with some sandbox elements and RPG elements mixed in, as a weird hybrid game, I felt it was actually a very good game if you approach it from that angle. Same thing with The Witcher 3, which had some mind-numbingly boring action combat consisting of a lot of button mashing, dodge, roll. The type of combat that many people attribute to console games. Even though it had that style of combat and the RPG mechanics in this through the skill tree and whatnot, a lot of the RPG mechanics were lacking. The story, coupled with the open world and the combat requiring a degree of skill, nonetheless created a very good title. Might not be everybody's personal taste, and I wouldn't recommend The Witcher 3 or Skyrim to a role player, but they both nonetheless were able to cobble together ideas and aspects of different genres to create an enjoyable experience. The problem with this game, though, is that it really doesn't take any good ideas from many genres at all. It isn't graphically impressive for the time. It had voice acting that sounded crisp, and it had some unique ideas. But the gameplay itself, assuming you could get, and even setting the bugs aside where the game would crash. For example, here I go to pick up something out of the chest, and then all of a sudden my person turns into fire, which I don't think was intended here, because I don't remember that ever happening any time before. And then the game just subsequently crashed. But yeah, regardless of the bugs in the game, the plot holes, the lackluster story, the lackluster, the controls that aren't terribly fluid by any type of modern day standards, or even by the standards of many games at the time. See Azeron's Call that came out the same year, which was an MMORPG. There's nothing left. There's nothing else to the game really that is so impressive that pulls this game up to make it a good game. Let's say it had all of those issues, but it had a few game mechanics that were a lot of fun. Like let's say it had all those issues, but it had a really good combat system, or a really good exploring the world was tied to gameplay and advancement in such a way that was unique, in such a way where just exploring the world was fun and helped create a fun experience. I'd be willing to forgive this game for that. But it really doesn't excel in any area. It's one of those games that leaves me unsure what to even say about it. It's a game that I don't have any previous ties to Ultima series in such a way where I'm willing to forgive the issues with story and lore. But there's just everything it does well enough is mediocre. It's basically a mediocre attempt at it's like if you took Redguard of the Elder Scrolls series, take Redguard, except make it buggier, make the controls worse, and make it respect the Elder Scrolls lore even less than Redguard did. But keep it about the same, keep the same amount of linearity, but then try to sell it as a role-playing game, and you end up with what Ultima IX is. It's barely, maybe if somebody were to go back and fix a lot of the bugs in this game and get the game, if they updated it to a modern engine, or even an older engine that worked better than what was used here, or just get the game running properly in such a way where the movement, the controls are fluid, and the game would stay running without crashing so often, regardless of what hardware is used. And also fix some of the issues where the game's like easily breakable. And fix some of the issues with really, I don't know what you would do with this game to fix it without completely overhauling it. It had good graphics for the time. It's a good soundtrack. And that's about it. Otherwise, what you have here is a broken game. Perhaps if maybe somebody with nostalgia for this game that had it at the time, it had more time than I did getting it up and running properly in such a way where it worked. It played the whole game through. Perhaps somebody had a fun experience with this. I'm not going to hold that against them, but on every system I've tried this on, ranging from older systems with the 3DFX card as advertised, all the way to modern systems to running it in virtual machines with different configurations, to using the GOG release, to the original releases, to official patches, the fan-made patches. The game crashes often, and the game underneath it all just isn't good. So what you have here are outdated graphics that still have some charm despite being outdated. A good soundtrack. A lackluster story. Controls that are not very fluid or responsive. You have some aspects of the world that are interesting and well constructed, and other aspects that are rather poorly constructed. And overall what you end up with is a below average mess. It might possibly be the worst out of all the Ultima games. I haven't played every single Ultima game, but I played enough of Ultima 1 that if I was stuck on an island and had to pick either Ultima 1 or Ultima 9 as the only game I could play for the rest of my life, I would pick Ultima 1 without question. And I didn't play Ultima 1 until after I'd played Ultima 9. It doesn't have any nostalgic significance to me. It's just a broken game. Where am I going to put it on the list? I am going to put it for what it does right. For what it does right in its attempt to construct a 3D world. And for the patient person that's willing to deal with the mechanics, I'm going to put it in the high end of the D range for what it does do right. I'm going to put it right under Roadrunner's Death Valley Rally for the Super Nintendo, and right above Star Wars Masters of Terraskazi for the PlayStation 1. Like I said, if somebody were to take this game and rework some of the core mechanics of the game, get it in a different engine, rewrite parts of the story, you could turn this into a serviceable game. It needs an engine where it can run properly. Even remake the game an RPG maker if you have to. But just it needs to be running in something, even if it's not a 3D engine. And whatever if it's not the engine itself, it's the way the engine was utilized. It just doesn't work. Or just lift the assets and put all the assets in a different engine. But everything required to make this game good involves essentially making a different game. So Yeah, that's Ultima IX. Some people call it the red-headed stepchild of the Ultima series. But it's the child that came out with birth defects is what it is. The child that came out with birth defects was in love its whole life and subsequently murdered somebody and ended up killed in prison. That's a more apt comparison of this game than the red-headed stepchild. Hope you enjoyed the review. And I know a lot of people like this game back in their childhood. And I could get why. There's games where... There are games on my own list where I still go back and play from time to time to stay that rank even lower than this one on my list. That are quite, from an objective standards, quite bad games. Including such games like TNC Surf Designs and Jaws for the NES and Super Play Action Football for the Super Nintendo and Days of Thunder and quite bad games. Including the one, and Roadrunner's Death Valley Rally, that's another game. Games that aren't good at all, but I have a nostalgic attachment to them, so I play them from time to time. So I understand that, but regardless of what type of framework you try to assess this game from, it fails in multiple key areas. When you look at the core game design, the game mechanics, the story and plot, given it's applicable, and even if you throw out the story and plot, the game mechanics fail. So I hope you enjoyed the review. Please like, subscribe, and have a great day.